Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of In the Spotlight. I'm Mike Kenichi. I'm very excited tonight because this is going to be a real good interview. I'm very fascinated by this. This man has had over 30 years of broadcasting and satellite, radio, TV, you name it. He's done it all. He's currently works for digital media for the company Encompass, and it is my honor to introduce to you Jay LaPrise. And Jay, I want to thank you for coming on because this is going to be a lot of fun. I mean, I think it's very important that people see what goes on behind the scenes. So thank you for coming on tonight.
Sure thing.
So Jay, let me ask you, how did this all start for you, this journey? I mean, you, like I said, you've had over 30 years of satellite broadcasting. I mean, so you're thinking 1991. How did it all become about? Because, that's quite the journey, like I said.
Well, just the actual satellite started in 1988. My second job out of college. First full-time job. I had a couple of part-time jobs while I was in college, but first full-time job out of college was a company that technically no longer exists. It was called Rainbow Network Communications, and it was a subsidiary at the time of Cablevision, and then was eventually spun off and is now known as AMC, American Movie Classics, is what it used to be called. Now it's just AMC Networks. So I went to college out on CW Post, which is
right. Hold on here. I lost you. You there?
Yep.
Okay. I lost you for a second, but no big deal. So you were talking about CW Post and.
Yep. So I was at CW Post, and then my senior year of college, I had an adjunct professor who's actually still part of the industry. He now works at a company called NEP, which is a rather large remote production and studio company. And he's based out of the city. The guy's name was Barry Katz. As I said, he's still out there. And he was the general manager at Rainbow Network at the time. But he was teaching a marketing class that I needed to take as part of my credit requirements to get out of college.
Right.
And before he had gone to work at Rainbow, he had worked at ABC Network and was working in their marketing department. And we had that little bit in common, the ABC part, because my junior year, I had gotten hired as a vacation relief engineer at WABC Radio. So we sort of had that ABC thing in common, and I paid attention in his class and did all right. And we got to the end of the year, and just thank you very much, yada yada yada, before yada 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 was a thing, and just kept his name and phone number. And then after my VR gig ended at WABC, reached out to him and so, well, we've got this job at our Earth station. What do you know about satellites? And I didn't know anything about satellites. I was a radio guy. So I did a little bit of research and went through a very long and slow hiring process. Took about 3.5, 4 months to get hired at the time for a job that paid $13,000 a year. So, really wasn't a big gig when I got started. But paid attention, asked questions along the way. And, 30 plus years later, here I am still doing anything related to big satellite antennas.
Right. So let me ask you, Jay, when you had went to college, I mean, were you in communicate? Did you go for like communications? I mean, was that something when you were in high school that you just knew you wanted to do?
It actually started even before that. I was in sixth grade, and we had a Wednesday afternoon for 1 hour a week special activities class, it was called. And we had one of, I believe he was a seventh grade teacher at the time, who like a lot of teachers at that point, needed second jobs to sort of fill in the holes financially. So he worked as a DJ at a couple of radio stations locally in the area. So he was interested in that part, obviously, and he passed along some of that information, and we did for that 1 hour a week a little 3-camera black and white videotape, and it was the VTRs at the time were like reel-to-reel machines. So they were open-faced machines. You threaded the tape around the head and had the take-up reel the whole 9 yards. And a little, like I said, 3-camera, black and white, a little glitch switcher to select between camera 1, camera 2, camera 3. And we all took our turns at being talent or being a director or being a cameraman. So that I, generally believe that was probably about age 11 or 12, something like that, whatever you are in 6th grade. And from there on in, I was hooked. It's the only thing I've ever wanted to do.
Right. And, Jay, you brought up the reel-to-reels. And, when I was at Connecticut School of Broadcasting, one thing that really, stood out to me is just, now, as you could see in 2021, and it kind of really began, right around 2000, people were able to use, the computer to edit stuff. But back then, you had to cut the tape, and you had to get the cuts just right to edit stuff. And I remember in Connecticut School of Broadcasting just getting so flustered trying to do that. And I was only in school doing it. And I can't imagine how people behind the scenes did all that. But I mean, they never missed a beat. And you really got to applaud those people because they didn't have the type of technology that, people are accustomed to today.
It's a much different level of editing, that's for sure. One of the first things, when you get to, at least in my case, was for college, was, part of your experience was that you had to learn how to do production before you were allowed to do on air, right? So you had to have a fundamental understanding of not only the equipment within the broadcast.
I think you might have hit your mute button, maybe. I'm not hearing you right now.
Not back yet?
No, I can't hear you. Did you hit something maybe?
No, I don't think so.
Let me see. Because it just muted somehow.
Yeah, it says it's still on.
Your mic looks okay, but
yeah,
I don't seem to hear you for some reason. I don't know what happened.
Now, let me try this and see if this is
Let me try taking this out and see if I can hear you. Talk now.
Any better?
Yeah, I can hear you without the headphones on. I don't know what happened there.
Okay.
Let me try putting them back in and see if I could hear you.
All
right, I could hear you now.
We'll keep going.
Okay. So sorry about that, folks.
Yeah, now I don't hear you.
Now you don't hear me? Okay. Let me see.
Lost your audio.
All right. Something's not right. I don't know what's going on. Let me see. Let me see if I take it out. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I do.
All right. Maybe it's the headphones. I don't know. I'll take them off and try to do this. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay. So, yeah, go ahead. You were talking.
So as part of that college experience, you had to learn how to work in production first. So you had a general understanding of, being able to work your way through what were then called cart machines. Obviously, you had turntables for vinyl, which is now back in play. And then obviously the ultimate, everything fed over to a reel-to-reel audio deck, which at the time was just a 2-channel, 1/4 inch, with your 12-inch spool of tape, and then your take-up reel. You lay a track down and then sit there with a grease pencil.
Yeah.
Making your marks on where you wanted your edits and move it back and forth, listen for that drum beat, because you always edited on a drum beat, preferably a down drum beat. And then make your edits, make sure it wasn't too sloppy, too tight. What was it? 7.5 inches per second was the length of tape that went by the head at the time. So, the faster the tape went by the head, the more room you had for those edits, right? So you could edit it at a higher speed. Obviously, it used a lot more tape, but it gave you a lot more room to figure out where was that best place for that edit. But generally, it was that 7.5 inches per second speed. So you'd learn all that level of production, and then from there you would move on to eventually an air shift based on how well you were able to perform in production, and then move on from there. So as part of college, I spent pretty much the 4 years dedicated into radio. Had television classes as part of the overall experience, but was really focused on radio. That was my first love in broadcasting. It always holds a special place for me, even though it's so dramatically different now than what it used to be. And every generation says that. So I'm just making sure I keep up my part of the deal. And then after, as I said, in college, ended up coming out of that job and through networking, if you want to call it that. Ended up with a job as a satellite Earth station operator, and then just moved my way along the line.
Right. And Jay, let me ask you, did you always want to do behind the scenes stuff? I mean, did you want to be on the air at some point? I mean, were you a big music or sports fan, or?
Well, definitely the music side of things. But I realized pretty quickly in college that I was average. I wasn't an exceptional disc jockey. I could make my way through as what was called a time and weather jock. I would have been really good at that, and I probably would have been okay in small to medium markets. Being a real personality and making major market, I don't think I ever would have been able to get to that level. So I migrated more even in college, probably even at as early as my sophomore year, more to the technical side than the on-air side of things. I still had fun doing it, but the real fun for me was really becoming more of the stuff behind the scenes. I got involved very closely with the chief engineer at the radio station at that time. Started learning how to wire, how to lay out a studio, how to get into a little bit of transmitter level work. Not as much as the rest of my career has been, but all those little things started to pay attention to in college. So it was the technical side of things really held more interest for me than being on air.
Right. And Jay, what I find interesting too, you touched on it a little bit about American movie classics. Now, not everybody back then had, cable, so not a lot of people had seen that station, but it sounds like to me when you started, working there, interning, that it was really in the early days of that being on TV. And it's amazing how big that network has gotten. But I mean, they showed so many classic movies. It was a great thing they came up with. They show you a lot of movies from like the 40s and the 30s. So I mean, that had to be really cool to be doing that.
Yeah, and here's another interesting. The channel wasn't even 24 hours a day. It used to run, I believe it was from like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and it would sign off, I believe, at 1 a.m. So it was 12 hours a day that the channel was on. And then it would share its transponder space with another channel that basically was, the predecessors to infomercials. So they would sell the 12 hours a day to these other networks, the other channels, just so they could fund the cost of running AMC. And it was a big deal when that channel went 24 hours. It was huge.
Right. Yeah, and eventually Turner Movie Classics would follow suit. And I mean, now you look at AMC, the stuff they show now, they've definitely put on a lot more, TV series. They have a lot of big series on there. So those
are all
yeah. And they had a lot of good, they've had a lot of good TV. So I mean, they really branched out, and you know, it's just crazy to think though, when you started there, they were still kind of not. They were established, but not what they would become.
Yeah, so when I first started, the host's name of it was Bob Dorian was his name. And then as Bob got a little older and health was starting to decline, um, he was replaced as the host by George Clooney's father. And I can't remember what his first name was. So, you know, they would come in, all of the movies were unedited, uninterrupted. They ran whatever their original theatrical release was, timing. So, you know, they'd come in, they'd do their little intro, some tidbits about how the production went, who were the actors during the movie, whether they liked the director, didn't like the director. And then they go in, well, and here's the movie. And then, you know, 2 hours later, they'd come back in with their little, you know, none of it was live, obviously, it was all taped performances, but they really, that was the big part about it. And another, you know, when they finally made that decision to go to, you know, a commercial network as opposed to just a subscriber network, it really changed who they were. But at that same point, you know, it's kind of tough to run a movie without any interruption for, you know, 2 hours these days. No, first of all, I don't think anybody has the attention span for it.
Right. Yeah, and you know, Jay, one of the things in this type of field is you do move around quite a bit, and you've moved around quite a bit. And I think around 1994 or 1995, you worked for either network or station called Wolf Coach. Talk about that a little bit, because I think you were responsible for like baseband and, you know.
Yeah. So Wolf Coach, a company that doesn't exist anymore, but they were a family-run, a family-owned company at the time. They employed about 70, 75 people, something like that. And they were based up in a town called Auburn, Massachusetts, just outside of Worcester. And we built vehicles for the television industry. So ENG vans, little electronic news gathering is what ENG stands for. You know, they're, you know, I would think most people would know what an ENG van looks like. And then SNG, satellite news gathering van. So that was pretty much what their focus was. They did some other things. They did some military-based vehicles. They also built some big production level vans, trucks that were used by a couple of the companies that are still in play. One I mentioned earlier, NEP. And then another big one is a company called Game Creek Video. That really is, you know, I think those are probably two of the biggest names in production as far as the coverage that they have and the trucks that they have, you know, spread across America. But NEP and Game Creek, you would be hard pressed not to find a national event that didn't have one of their trucks there. From World Series to Super Bowls to the Masters, all of those events, you'll find one of those companies at that being used by one of the networks. Game Creek, just as I know, the Yes Network, all of their, they have a truck specifically made for them and that's run by Game Creek Video. It's called the Yankee Clipper. It's a nice name for a truck, right? And made specifically by, you know, for the Yes Network, but operated by Game Creek. So Wolf Coach was not as big as some of the names of the companies that made those trucks, but they had made a couple of them. So it was a pretty good experience for me. I worked in what was known as the integration department. Going back to, you know, finding out what do you like and what do you end up doing. You know, in that time frame in college, I found out, hey, I really like that technical putting things together side. And that my job at Rainbow, that sort of expanded and grew even more. And, you know, I found out that, you know, I was a fairly decent wireman. Which, you know, it is a skill for guys who are really good at it. it's something to be able to take, 4,000 or 5,000 wires that are just kind of laying all over the place, and by the time you're done, have it turn out to be this incredibly beautiful and functional, which is the important version of it, interconnect of all of the infrastructure that ends up making a radio or a television broadcast. So
Right.
That's what I worked on specifically when I was at Wolf Coach, was in their integration department. So it was a pretty good gig. I learned a lot in a short period of time, but really missed the satellite, the true satellite side that I had worked at RNC, and ended up moving to Connecticut, moving to Connecticut in 1996. Been here since.
Right. And I think you were with Wolf Coach for about 15 months, so it was a short stay.
Short
And
stay.
But then in 1996, around the summer, I believe, you started with a network, Group W Network Services, and you stayed there for almost 8 years. Just talk about that, because that's a long time in the type of field you do, to be at one place like that.
Well, it's what's even more so is I've actually stayed in the same place the entire time. The company has changed around me.
Yeah.
So I physically have been going to the same spot for 25 years now.
Wow.
At this point, I am at that particular facility. I am the senior length of service person on site. So, but there were a couple of guys that both were in their 30 plus years before they moved on for different various reasons. So, it's been very good to me. The facility has been very good to me. And I've been very lucky to work with some really good people over the years at that place. So,
Right.
yeah, it's been good.
And Jay, let me ask you this, talking about satellite,
Mhm.
let's talk a little bit about satellite radio, because that kind of came about in like 2003, 2004. And
Yeah.
it took some time, but it's amazing to me to see some of the names that have come, onto satellite radio over the years. I could think of Howard Stern, obviously.
Yeah,
Bubba,
obviously, yeah.
Bubba the lunch sponge,
Love Sponge.
Love Sponge, yeah.
Yeah.
Chris Mad Dog Russo.
Yeah.
Now you got Barstool. I mean, just talk about satellite radio, because I didn't know if it was going to last, and it seems like each year it's gotten bigger and bigger, and now it's really big. So just talk about that a little bit.
Sure. I was actually something I was really excited about when they were both being planned for this. They started out obviously as Sirius and NXM, two competing companies, with two very different plans on how they were going to distribute their signals. I was more excited about the Sirius company itself. Their original satellites were really cool engineering design, and how they were used and how they were flown with, for somebody who was in the satellite industry, was really the cooler of the two. XM uses, and now the Sirius side is too, both use what's known as a geostationary satellite. So when a satellite is launched to a geostationary orbit, they are placed 22,300 miles above the equator, and their orbital time frame matches the speed of the Earth. So they appear to be stationary. And the distribution of signals and where your antenna needs to look at varies depending on geographically your latitude and longitude of wherever you are. The Sirius satellites, when they were first launched, flew in what was known as a very highly elliptical figure 8 orbit. And they would use this time frame. Obviously their primary focus for distribution of services was over North America. And in their figure 8 that they would fly, they would come up, and they would have a low pass on the Earth, and then they would get over Canada into the upper regions of Canada, when they would flip and come back around again. And it was on that second pass at their highest point of the arc that they would turn the satellite payload on. And because they were at that high elliptical orbit, the look angle for the antennas on vehicles was at about 60 degrees. So, 0 degrees off the horizon, 45, 60. So it was a really good angle to hit the antennas that were on cars. And any place that they needed to fill in, they had what are known as repeater sites, which were local little. They would receive the satellite signal and then rebroadcast it on a terrestrial based, but all within the same frequency band. But that type of orbit was a lot of work on the satellite itself. It used a lot of fuel because you're constantly making adjustments. And the satellite's life is defined on how much fuel it keeps on orbit for making adjustments to its orbital. So a geostationary satellite has a very long average lifespan of about 15 years, where the satellites used for serious work 5 to 7. So they were already short time frame. It costs a lot of money to do a launch, costs a lot of money to maintain ground infrastructure. You had to have operators who are knowledgeable in all of the orbital mechanics of keeping a satellite operational. So it was much more expensive. But from a technical standpoint and delivery of service, it was much better.
Right.
Because you maintain that high orbital lock, you didn't have a lot of dropouts, so on and so forth. So the Sirius side was, as a satellite guy, was more interesting to me. So that's who I subscribed to first. And then ultimately, they ended up merging together. But I've, once I got my Sirius subscription, I have very rare that I listen to commercial radio anymore. It's hard for me to listen to stations that have a rotation of maybe 60 songs.
Yeah.
It's really tough. And then they got their top ones that they're going to play, and you're going to hear them every hour. Not to knock a specific radio station that happens to be classic rock in our neck of the woods. But I said, I can't drive to work again and listen to Led Zeppelin's Whole Lot of Love every time I get in the car. It's like, there are 7 Led Zeppelin albums or whatever the total number is. You can play more than 4 songs, right? And you can play them more than once every hour too. It's just, they just really killed the goose as far as I was concerned. And I used to, be a big fan of Led Zeppelin when I was younger, because, obviously that's what you did. And it just, like I said, Whole Lot of Love and Black Dog, and, it's, and God knows if they played Stairway to Heaven that I'd, be like this. And the Wayne's World, no Stairway to Heaven, So, when it moved into to being able to listen to Sirius and just pick a station and let it play and not have to worry about commercials, and for that matter, not having to worry about change the station for 7 or 8 hours if you were on a drive, that was really cool. So satellite radio, I think it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. Obviously, the two companies merged together. And then, a couple of years ago, they bought Pandora as another way to make sure that when you weren't in the vehicle, and now they've opened them all up to, streaming subscription, carry your phone and listen to it there as opposed to wherever you are. So they've done a really good job at reinventing themselves, I think, to make sure that they stay as part of your daily experience.
Right. And Jay, one of the things you do a lot of is you travel a lot. And, this is a 2-part question. One, does that get kind of tedious for you a lot, having to always travel like you do, because you're not always home? And I don't care what anybody says. It's not always easy, living out of your suitcase a lot. And number 2, I'm sure that you've probably met a lot of, pretty, famous people over the years just by doing this type of work. I mean, talk about that a little bit. Talk about some of the people you've been able to kind of have relationships with and, kind of meet along the way.
Well, I'll answer the travel part first. I love it, still do. I
Yeah.
always have. I love flying. I don't, not the airport experience is not the greatest part about it. But I still get pumped up, when that door closes. I'm a window seat guy. Love to have the window open. Love to watch, everything that goes along with making an airplane work. The crews to get it there, the pilots, the whole 9 yards. Um, and I love that engineering aspect of an airplane.
Yeah.
And I'm not one of those that gets all squeamish about it. I love watching, why planes crash, airplane disasters. I love all of those TV shows, which I guess for someone who flies as much as I do, it's a little weird, but it's cool to know on what goes wrong and how it went wrong. So if it ever were to be, that's the day it's going down. It's going down. I had a great ride, so I don't get too concerned about that part. And people say they will have a safe flight, and they say, well, they don't want to fly the plane, so it's probably safer for everybody that way.
Yeah.
But some of the people over the years, trying to think of a quick one. As I said, when I started out, working with, radio, I had some really cool. I met Jay Leno, and I got to be the recording engineer for the talent at the time. It was at the Essex House Hotel in New York City. He had a huge suite up on one of the upper floors, and it was before he actually even become the host of the Tonight Show. He was still just sort of filling in for Johnny Carson at the time. So that was a really cool interview. Another good one was also associated with at WABC time. They were the broadcasting partner of the Yankees at the time. And once again, got to, hey kid, go grab the tape recorder and go up to Yankee Stadium and get some background interviews. I was, 20 years old, 21 years old, something like that, and sitting in the dugout, and I've got Ron Guidry on one side of me and Don Mattingly on the other side of me. So, that was pretty cool. Did an interview with Phil Collins.
Oh, wow.
Stevie Ray Vaughan just before he died. So those were a couple of really good ones at that age. I don't know if you remember the Phil Collins song "Take Me Home."
Oh yeah, awesome.
Did all those bops around the world. That right after that video came out, I was at ABC PLJ at the time, and they did the opening day of ticket sales for the Radio City Rockettes of the Christmas Spectacular. And we broadcast the entire Jim Kerr radio show from on top of the marquee. So it was, like I said, that was the same time that Phil Collins video come out, and he had done the tail end of his song standing on that marquee. Yeah. So that was really kind of a cool experience for, a little country kid from Massachusetts.
Right. So speaking of Phil Collins, who did you prefer in Genesis, Gabriel or Collins?
They're very, very different bands. I don't even think it's right to compare them, to tell you the truth. It's totally different. One Genesis under Phil Collins became a pop band, and they were never a pop band under Peter.
Yeah.
That was just not who they were. They're really a totally different band.
Yeah, I always say this. I liked Collins better in the band, but I liked Gabriel better as a soloist. So I always look at it that way. I mean, they both are tremendous performers any way you look at it.
Gabriel's got a much better voice. But, like I said, it was two completely different bands. And if you played them for someone who didn't know the two, I don't even think they'd recognize them as being the same band.
Right. Now, let me ask you this, Jay. You you do all this work and stuff, and now, you kind of oversee a team of people,
Mhm.
you're kind of, the head man of that and stuff. And I mean, one of the things that you've always said is you always encourage them to be the best that they could be. You're always challenging them to be better than the day before. Just talk about that a little bit, because, it's not always easy when you're overseeing a group of people, because you got to worry about your responsibilities, but you also got to make sure they're doing what, the expectations of them are.
Yep.
But talk about that a little bit.
Well, managing people is probably the toughest part of the job, right? Everybody brings their personality to work with them. Everybody has good days and bad days at work. The side of the business that I'm working in, you don't get a chance to correct a mistake, because your mistake is very visible. So any interruption in distribution of services for any of my clients has a very real impact. Some of them have severe financial impacts for my company when somebody makes a mistake. Obviously, some of them can be very visible on air. Just last weekend, I had an operator in one of our facilities make a mistake, and ultimately it put a game from one particular market in a different market on air for a couple of minutes, right? So obviously that's a very real impact. The home user is sitting there watching a basketball game, and suddenly a hockey game breaks out. I know that's an old joke somewhere along the line, but in this case, that's not a good thing, right? So the follow up to that is that, first off, you have to figure out and acknowledge what happened, why it happened. Was it a lack of understanding by the person who did it? Was it something else? Was there other pressures that led to that? So that's a large part of the day-to-day aspect of cleaning up after an error. But ultimately, what you're trying to do after that mistake is come to a resolution, not only for the employee and the client, on how it occurred and how to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Everybody's going to make a mistake. The next one is the one that you want to work on and prevent. And the only way that you get to that is to make sure that everybody is self-assured, that the penalty for that mistake is not something that's going to continue to be brought up and be part of the focus. It happened. Let's move on. Let's make sure we can, not repeat that one. If you make a different mistake, then all right, then it's going to happen, but don't make the same one over and over again. And I have in North America, I have a staff of about 50 people in total, and 3 different facilities. So it's I have direct reports, and then they're my direct reports. I have reports underneath them, but ultimately they all report up to me. And when there's an issue, my boss is not calling the person who made the mistake; he's calling me to find out what happened. So being aware of what the staff are responsible for and what their experiences are, anything that might be an issue caused by something that we didn't provide the employee to do their job right, is something that ultimately would be something you'd need to correct. So positive reinforcement, even in a mistake situation, is the only way that you can really succeed in making sure that your staff succeeds. And when your staff succeeds, then our clients succeed, and then ultimately, our company succeeds. So that's what it's really all about.
Right. Jay, you talked about it a little bit earlier, how you did work, for WABC and the Yankees and stuff like that, which is pretty ironic considering you're a diehard Boston Red Sox fan. And just let me ask you this, Jay, as far as, the Red Sox go, I think I know the answer to this, but just tell me this: what was probably your most memorable moment as a Red Sox fan?
Well, there's no question. It's 2004, right?
Yeah.
I grew up in a very small little town in Western Massachusetts. And it was just enough that WABC radio, of all things that I ended up working at later on in my life, was the radio station that my grandfather would listen to because it was a clear channel AM and the signal would carry all over New England. And he would listen to Yankee games as a kid when I was growing up. And every spring, we would make a bet on who would place first or place higher in the standings. Didn't have to be first, but who placed higher in the standings, Red Sox or Yankees. And the bet was a Friendly's ice cream cone. So it wasn't a huge bet, dollar figure wise. I think you could probably get a double scoop ice cream cone at those days, probably for $1, right? But when you're a kid, $1 is still a big deal. So at least it was at that stage. So I grew up with that, that competition of Red Sox Yankees, even when I was a kid, because, getting a free ice cream cone out of your grandfather was a big deal, right? So, but without question, entire generations, people lived their entire lives never seeing the Red Sox win a World Series. As a 10-year-old boy, when baseball is everything to you, and having the Red Sox play against the Big Red Machine in 1975, and end up losing in 7 games in what most people consider probably the greatest World Series ever played, was obviously a really tough. And I listened to that World Series on the radio. We didn't, where I grew up, we didn't get the local TV station that carried the Red Sox games. So I listened to it on WTIC AM 1080 out of Hartford. That's where I heard baseball. And then in 1986, I was, on school on Long Island at CW Post, and working in the city already at WABC Radio. And I would take the train in from the North Shore of Long Island, and I would ride in on the train that went right by Shea Stadium. So after Game 6, which we all know was not a great game for a Red Sox fan, having to ride that train past Shea as everybody was coming in, dealing with Game 7, and then the next night having to ride into work again after Game 7. So I had some pretty traumatic events as a Red Sox fan as a kid growing up. So obviously winning that World Series in 2004, and I personally, if that was the only one they ever won, I would have been happy. But to turn around and win 3 more after that, it's been pretty cool.
And what's crazy about the whole thing, though, Jay, and I'll talk about both parts of this. Number one, Buckner got ridiculed for years. But what people don't understand is the Red Sox had 2 outs, nobody on, and they were up, I believe, 5-3, and they gave that lead back before he made that error. He always gets blamed, but I think Calvin Schiraldi was really the GOAT in that game. Yeah. And, he doesn't get, enough blame like they blamed Buckner for years, which was
unfortunate. Because it's easy. It's rolling through his legs. It's easy to blame him.
Yeah.
Right?
But, and the other thing is they always talked about the Red Sox being cursed, but I mean, the Chicago White Sox hadn't won one since 1917, and then they finally did in 05. The Cubs hadn't won one since 1908. It's funny how the Red Sox always got, kind of characterized as the curse of Bambino and all this stuff that they couldn't win, because there were other teams that did worse than they did, and they went to World Series. I mean, the White Sox and Cubs, they didn't go to a World Series till they won it. So, I always thought that was a little weird, that how they always took shots at the Red Sox.
Yep. Boston obviously is no longer, its overall population has declined. It's no longer within the top 10 markets, I don't believe. but I think that rivalry between Boston, New York, obviously is much higher. The Chicago teams, the White Sox and the Cubs, that's an internal rivalry. It's not a city rivalry. So I think that, probably, and not to knock it, but it's Midwest. It's not the same as it is now. Chicago is, I think it's still the number 3 market.
Yeah.
But Houston's number 4 at this stage. A lot has changed as where the population has shifted. Baseball obviously is spread across the country, but when there was for the most part in East Coast, St. Louis was as far west as anybody went for baseball up into the 50s. So there was a lot of years worth of rivalry going on there between New York and Boston.
Right. Jay, let me ask you, it could be music, entertainment, sports. Who's the one person that you would love to interview that maybe you haven't gotten to interview? Who would you want to interview if you could pick one person?
That's an interesting question. Well, I'm a real big history guy. I love history. I would think Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
Would really be the one guy I would really truly enjoy, not only just meeting, but if you had a couple of hours worth of his time, I would think that would probably be it. Lincoln, right. And then probably follow that up with Jefferson. As a kid, I was fascinated by Thomas Jefferson, and then as I got older, and I did more studying, more research, what Abraham Lincoln brought to this country and kept this country what it is, as a fully republic. I would think he'd probably be number 1.
Right. Jay, let me ask you, you've been doing this 30 years. I'm sure there comes a point where you want to kind of head off into the sunset and, kind of sit back and, take a break eventually. I mean, I know you don't want to look ahead, but where do you see yourself in 5 years? What do you want to be doing?
5 years, so I'll still be doing this.
Yeah.
I have a 14-year-old son, so I still got a few years before retirement really realistically is a factor. I have always said that Connecticut was as far south as I ever wanted to live. I would love to retire to the coast of Maine. That's really where I'd like to see that if we get to that point. It's been fabulous. My company CEO is 72 years old, and he is just as active today as he was the first time I met him 25 years ago. And he goes full bore every day. So age is, it does weigh on you at some points. There's no getting around it. We all feel it at some points during the day. But as long as I'm eligible, I will keep doing it. I will steal one of his lines that I'm basically unemployable outside of this industry. So I'll keep doing it for as long as I can.
Right. Well, Jay, that's awesome. And this was a lot of fun. I had really wanted to interview you for quite some time. And I really admire what you do each and every day. And what people in that field do, to me, is very remarkable. And they probably don't get enough credit like they should. But I think what you and, everybody else who's in that field does is really something that everybody should applaud. And I really thank you for coming on today.
Well, thank you very much. It has been, it went by quick. I will say that, every once in a while, I'll be, get a someone will point out, hey, watch the end of this show or watch the end of something, and you'll be watching, and your name will show up on a credit roll. And it's going by really fast, right? Because, yeah. But it is still kind of cool to be acknowledged. Over the years, I've been lucky enough to see my name scroll by at the end of a Super Bowl. I've seen it scroll by at the end of the year network presentation for, welcome to our transmission partners or something like that. So it is nice to get an acknowledgement every once in a while. Everybody likes to be acknowledged. But it has been a lot of fun, and I wouldn't trade a second for it. And realistically, I'm not looking forward to it ending anytime soon.
Well, I really do appreciate it, and I really thank you again for coming on. And I just look forward to seeing you continue your career, and congratulations on what has been a brilliant career.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Mike.
Thank you, Jay. Well, folks, there you have it. In this hour that we did with Jay LaPrise, you learned a lot of things. You learned a lot about the behind the scenes things that go on with satellite TV, satellite radio. You learned about all the preparation and all the hard work that goes into making it work. But the thing that stands out to me the most about Jay LaPrise is this isn't work for him. This is a passion. And you could tell just by hearing it in his voice that this is a labor of love that he's been doing every day for over 30 years now. He's bounced around a little bit, but that's no problem because he loves to challenge himself. And what he does in TV, what he does behind the scenes each and every day is something that should never go unnoticed or ever be, and should never be underrated. When you look back on people that really make it work behind the scenes and do the things that are needed to make everything work, Jay LaPrise's name has to be at the top of the list. For In the Spotlight, I'm Mike Kenichi saying good night, everyone.